Hello everyone, my name is Ibrahim Hanbal, and in this video I'll be going over Module 6 of Practical Research 1. This covers the research methodology quantitative research. Now, this topic may be familiar to many of you since this was already mentioned in previous modules. If you recall, quantitative research deals with numerical data and makes use of surveys and questionnaires in order to gather data. In this module, we'll be taking a closer look at quantitative research and how it's applied in a research or in a study. So we'll be looking at how we determine who to survey or how we plan out our survey or data gathering methodologies. So, to start, let us look at some of the objectives. So, we have three objectives here. First is to define a research methodology. Second is to define the basic concept of research design for quantitative research. And third is to determine the appropriate study design and sampling design. For our content, we have three parts. The research methodology, second is the research design, and third is the sampling frames. So these are the three main topics that we will be covering for quantitative research. So let's start with research methodology. So as mentioned earlier, we already briefly discussed qualitative and quantitative research. Qualitative research, if you recall, looks at the expressions, the opinions, the experiences, and the life stories, essentially, of your participants with the use of interviews, with the use of focus group discussions, and more personalized data gathering methods. So for these upcoming modules, we'll be taking a closer look at quantitative and qualitative research designs and how they are applied in our research. To start, what is the methodology and the method? So, methodology refers to the overall approaches and perspectives to the whole research process or to the whole process of research. This is essentially how you plan to conduct your entire research process. How will you collect data? What type of data will you collect? How much data will you collect? How will you analyze that data? How will you process it? How will you visualize it? And so on. So it's sort of the all encompassing strategy on how you plan to conduct your research or to conduct your study. So it answers some very important questions with regards to your study, some of which are listed here. So let's take a look at some of them. Let's open our pen here. So first question, why? Why will you collect certain data? Let's say your study is concerned with, let's say, the environment. Okay, why do you need to collect data? What type of data do you need to collect, and why is this data important to your study? Will this be able to answer your research question? Will this be able to answer the objectives or the problems that are listed in your research? So you sort of have to ask yourself and your team, why do you need certain data? What is the importance of this certain data? So one way to help you answer that is with the use of your methodology. Next is the what. What data will you collect? Are you going to collect um, survey answers? Do you need numerical information? Do you need experiences? Do you need to ask like the life story or the experiences of your participants? Do you need to have some in-depth context with regards to the situations or um, the perspectives of your participants? So you have to ask yourself, what data do you want to collect? So that is another question that can be answered with the help of the methodology, a solid methodology. Next is where. Where do you plan to collect your data? Are you going to collect it in Baguio City, in the UC Senior High School Department? Are you going to collect it within the Cordilleras, within the Philippines, the whole Philippines? So where do you plan to collect your data? So this is a way to help set boundaries so that you are not spending too much time or you're not spending too much effort trying to reach out to areas outside your scope of your study. So if your concern is only students in the UC Senior High School, then that's what you will focus on. That's where you will collect your data from, your where. And the next one is the how, the first how. How will you collect it? So this is simply put our surveys, interviews, questionnaires. In the case of qualitative, obviously we'll make use of interviews and focus group discussions. Quantitative, this will be your surveys, questionnaires, and observations, as well as experiments. And then the last question, how? How will you analyze it? So how do you plan to analyze your data? Will you compile it in an Excel sheet and then manually analyze it? Will you make use of a specific algorithm? Will you make use of a specific method such as cause effect analysis or YY analysis or 5 Ys? Or will you make use of a software such as IBM SPSS or MATLAB to help you analyze your software, so or to analyze your data? So this will be answered with the help of your methodology. A research methodology will help you understand what tools you need to use so that you can achieve the goal of your research. The research method refers to the various specific tools and ways that data can be collected and analyzed. So the idea here is that these are the different tools that you have available, whether these are software, whether these are templates, whether these are online tools or platforms which allow you to collect data, online surveys, online forms, or uh, online meeting applications such as Zoom or Discord or Skype or Google Meet. So these are all tools which will help you gather data. So research method is more specific in that it focuses on how data is collected and analyzed in your study. In ICT, especially for larger or more advanced projects, we make use of a software methodology. So, as the name suggests, this methodology focuses on the various steps in developing a software or a piece of application. So, this is mainly used when you are trying to lay out the steps that you will take in order to determine the requirements of your application, develop your application, deploy and then test, or test and then deploy your application, and then obviously maintenance, or you maintain the system that you have created. So this is normally used in ICT research, but it is not necessarily required. This is just a way to help explain how your system was created and how it was built for the purpose of answering the research question in your study. So examples of this are the waterfall methodology and the agile methodologies. So that is it for the research methodology. Let's move on to the research design. So the research design, or what we call the study design, is the process that guides research on how to collect, analyze, and interpret observations. The goal of a research design or study design is to help us understand how we will collect our data, analyze our data, and interpret our data, or interpret what data we have gathered, in this case observations or survey answers or questionnaire answers. So in quantitative research, there are two types of study design. We have observational type and the experimental type. So let us look at the observational type first. This is where the sample population is observed for various characteristics. As the name suggests, you are simply observing. This is sometimes called non-intervention study or non-experimental study. Why? Because the researcher only observes and does not intervene. They will simply jot down whatever they see, what behaviors they notice, routines, if there's any changes in the situation, the phenomena that they are observing, or if there's any factors that have affected the scenario that is playing out in front of them. All they will do is jot down notes, maybe take pictures or video if needed, and they will compile or collect those notes and then analyze them later on. Now, there are two ways that observational studies can be conducted. The first is a cross-sectional study. Here, you will analyze the data collected from a population or a representative subset at one specific point in time, representing cross-sectional data. In other words, this is when you are looking at data from one specific point in time or one specific situation. So, for example, you will observe a group of students in one of their classes on one specific week or one specific um, period. So you will not um, look at any other subjects, other factors. You will simply focus on what they were doing at that time at that specific subject for that class. So you are not going to consider other factors. It is again a sort of a snapshot. You are only looking at one specific point in time. So an example of that is shown below. Exploring the impact of relationship transparency on business relationships, a cross-sectional study among purchasing managers in Germany by Eggert and Helm, 2003. So again, this is an example of how research is done in this case. Um, you are simply looking at what your participants, your entities in your study are like in a specific scenario. You only are concerned with how they act, how they conduct themselves, how they respond to stimuli in one specific situation. The other type of observational study or observational research is what we call the cohort study. So this collects data over long periods of time and measures each variable over two or more distinct time periods. This is also known as longitudinal study, and it involves a group of people who share a common characteristic. Now, the difference here with the previous, which is cross-sectional study, is that cohort study tries to look at the changes in the participants in the data over a long period of time. So it is more involved, not necessarily intervening in the process, but it's more involved with how your participants, how your entities, how your phenomena is shaped over time. Another example is students. You can look at how students evolve over time from when they are first years, when they are new to the school that they're in, and as they become seniors, you can observe how they change, how they interact with others, with their peers, with their teachers, with other people outside or inside the school over time with the use of a cohort study. So this is a bit more involved in that you are trying to look at how your participants, how your entities are evolving over time. So this can take a lot. This can take a lot more time to do. Maybe more, a few weeks, months, even years, depending on the scope of your study. An example of this is shown below. Age cohort analysis in adoption of mobile data services. Gen Xers versus baby boomers by Yang and Jolly, 2008. So again, another good example. It shows how Gen Xers and baby boomers make use of mobile data technology and mobile technology in general. So that is an example of a cohort study. Let's move on now to the experimental type. Experimental type, as the name suggests, makes use of experiments. This is where factors other than those under consideration are being controlled. So here, the researcher can manipulate the objects or situations and measure the outcome of their manipulations, how the situation changes if you change factors in your study. So the first type of experimental study is what we call the true experimental study. So in this case, the participants or subjects are randomly assigned to the treatment conditions, the levels of the independent variable. So here, we try to see how our participants or subjects will react when they are placed in different situations or different scenarios. An example is, let's say, a work environment. If you have an employee who is used to one type of work environment, maybe they are a bit more mechanical in their work. They don't like change. They don't like fast-paced work environments. They prefer consistency. Placing them in an environment that is a bit more fast-paced or a bit more um, um, flexible might um, obviously change the way that they will approach the work or change their efficiency or how they will conduct themselves in the workplace. So a true experimental study again tries to look at how your participants will react when they are placed in new situations or different situations than either what they are used to or what they are familiar with. So in this case, the researcher has a lot of control over the situations, over the what they call treatment conditions. So you can change the scenario that the participants are involved in, or the environment, or other major factors. The other type of experimental research is what we call the quasi-experimental studies. So in this research, the treatment level is determined by conditions beyond the control of the experimenter. Unlike true experiment, this does not have random assignment of respondents or subjects to the treatment condition. So this is a bit different in that here the researcher is not able to fully influence every factor in their study. What they still have a level of influence where they can change certain behaviors or the way certain entities in the study act or react, but their influence or their ability to influence these factors is much more limited. So the idea here is that you are trying to subtly push your participants towards certain actions or towards certain behaviors to try and see how they will adapt or how they will fare in a certain environment. A good example of this is again an employee in the workplace. You take an employee who has like a consistent work schedule or a consistent routine, and then you try to have them change that routine and see if there's any change in the work efficiency or the efficiency of their peers or how their workplace is there any major or significant effect in the workplace environment that they are in. Preparing your research design. So it is important to prepare your research design because again, this is what you will use as a basis to help you map out your data gathering methods, your data analysis methods, and other methods that are involved in your research. Essentially, this will help you determine how you will gather data, who you'll gather the data from, and uh, how long, what methods you'll use, and how you will actually compile and analyze that data. So the first factor is to check the means of obtaining the information. How do you plan to get your data? Is it again through interviews, through surveys? What are your tools available? Will you chat online through a meeting tool such as Zoom or Google Meet, or will you make use of email or a chatting application such as Messenger or Viber or um, Line? The availability and skills of the researcher and his or her group mates, if any. So you also have to consider your own skills. What skills do you have? What skills are available to you, and what skills do your group mates have, so that you can see what tools or what applications you can make use of. For example, maybe one of your group mates is good with web development. They can make a web app in that case, which will serve as an online survey tool, and then have that be visited by your participants, that it will be easier for you and your team to collect your data. The third bullet is the explanation of the way in which selected means of obtaining information will be organized and the reasoning leading to the selection. This is important in research because it gives your reader an idea of why you chose to do your research in a certain method. So, what is one factor to consider is how you will justify your research decisions, how you will justify your research methodology. Why did you choose quantitative research? Why did you use qualitative research? Why did you choose 20 participants? Why did you survey 40 participants? Why did you choose only to survey senior high school students, and so on? So one thing that is important is that you're able to explain why you chose to survey or to gather data in that certain method. The fourth is the time available for research. Obviously, our time is limited, so we must make the most of it. So we have to consider the time it takes to get permission to interview people, to gather survey data, or to be able to get or to be able to observe your participants or your subjects in your study. And lastly, the cost factor relating to research. This is referring to things such as travel expenses if you need them, or food expenses, meeting expenses, and other miscellaneous expenses such as subscriptions. Maybe you are using an online service that is paid in order to conduct your data gathering. Example is a premium Zoom account or Zoom subscription. So those are things to consider when you are preparing your research design. Now, let us move on to the last part of this module, which is sampling frames. So what is sampling? Sampling refers to the concept or the process of selecting a representative by giving each member of the population equal chances to be selected. Selection of a sample population should be unbiased and sufficiently stand as a representative of the population under study. Now this is important. Why? Because usually we will end up having to deal with very large populations for a study. For example, let's say you would like to conduct a study on the senior high students of Baguio. So let us say that this is the population of the senior high students. Take note that there's roughly 5 to 6,000 students in total for the senior high school in UC. So UC alone rather. So assuming that this is the entire population of the senior high school in UC. So senior high school UC, and let's just say in between 5,500 roughly. And let's add there. So roughly 5,000 students. Are you going to conduct a survey on all of these participants or all of these students? No, that will be very time consuming. That will take a lot of resources, a lot of manpower, and your study might never finish because you will spend all your time, all your resources, all your effort on merely collecting data. So the idea here is that you will take a sample. You will take a small slice of this population, and then that now will be the basis for your study. For example, let's say 200 senior high students. So what this tells us now is that you will gather data from these 200 senior high students, and these 200 students will be used as a basis to help us generalize the result to the larger population. So for example, let's say that your survey has two choices, A and B. So A and then B, and then 80% of your participants in this survey chose A, and then the other 20% chose B. So that is what you found for your 200 participants. In your study, you can then conclude that this response will be similar to what you would get if you were to interview all 5,000 students of the senior high school. No, that is the idea there. You are trying to make use of a smaller population, gather data from them so that you can end up generalizing the result to a larger population. The idea is that if you sample your population well, or your participants well, you will not have you will have a population or a group of participants who represent who accurately represent your overall population or your overall group or number of participants. So there are two types of sampling procedures. The first is probability sampling, and the second is non-probability sampling. Let's look at the first one, probability sampling. So in this type of sampling, we are giving equal chances for all members of the population to become chosen as part of the research. So probability sampling includes, but is not limited to, the following. The first is simple random sampling. Here, you simply choose a random number from a table, or randomly select an individual from the whole population, also known as the lottery or raffle type. Why? You are simply going to just choose a random person. So assuming, let's say your let's say you wrote every student's name on a piece of paper. So let's say this is their first name and then last name, and then you put that into a bowl. Say this is our bowl. Then it has a bunch of papers, let's say like that. Then you will just simply pick, let's say, 30 people from this bowl, and then that will now be your population. Take note that it's random, so or these participants might not be able to help you answer your objectives or your research questions. That's the drawback. You are sometimes going to get people who are unrelated to your study or who don't really have any understanding or any involvement into the problem that you are trying to solve. So that's the key point here. It is usually mostly random. So you will just choose a random set of people to not interview, but to survey or to observe for your study. The others are, we have here systematic random sampling where it is systematically chosen. So in this case, you can have a bit more control. You can specify, okay, I only want to interview, let's see, ICT animation students. I only want to interview STEM. I only want to interview ABM students, and so on. So you can be a bit more specific. I only want to interview grade 11 students, grade 11 ABM, grade 11 STEM, grade 12 ICT animation. So you can be a bit more specific with how you will um, determine your population, but again, or your sample, but again, you will be somewhat random with choosing. So for example, in the case of senior high school, we have 4 sections right now: A, B, C, and D. Your random sampling might end up giving you only students from section A or only students from section B, and so on. So that is one thing to consider. Stratified random sampling means selecting an equal representation of samples based on a given homogeneous group. So an example of this is if we look at, let's say, students in the senior high school. So let's say ICT animation, ICT animation. So we have 4 sections: A, B, C, and D. So stratified random sampling will try to make sure that you get a equal number of representatives from these 4 sections, A, B, C, and D. So this allows you to make sure that you at least have equal representation from the different groups or the different categories from your population. Not stratified, but cluster random sampling has a similar process, but this is more when dealing with a large group of people, especially in a city. So this usually has now very big heterogeneous groups. An example is Baguio City. So obviously we have a lot of demographics here. We have, let's say, just on the jobs alone or the careers of the people here, we have students, we have teachers, we have, let's say, we have police officers, obviously, we have drivers, we have retail workers, fast food workers, we have call center agents, we have doctors, we have nurses. So we have a very, very diverse set of people. So in this case, you will now have to identify different factors in you'll have to identify different clusters and try to make sure that you at least get representation from most of them. For example, students. There's a lot of student groups here in Baguio City. We have students from UC, students from UB, students from SLU, and so on. And it's not just students from UC. We have senior high students, we have junior high students, we have college students. So there's a very, very diverse group now of people that you will have to consider when you are doing your sampling. And then lastly, we have multi-stage random sampling, where you will simply divide your population yourself into clusters and then you choose a random cluster. So for example, I will take all students in the um, University of the Cordilleras, all, let's give a rough estimate. Let's say 10,000 students. Obviously, that's not an exact number, but as an example, 10,000 students, I'll divide those students into, let's say, chunks of 500, and then I will choose 3 random chunks of 500 students, and that will now be my participants or my subjects for my study. So that is for multi-stage random sampling. The key point with all of these is that it is random. Okay, that is for probability sampling. Now, just something to keep in mind, when you talk about sample sizes, there's three terms that you will encounter. First is population size. So population size is the total number of people in the group that you are trying to study. So essentially, this is the overall number of people. So to compare your overall population or your population size of senior high school in UC is roughly, let's say, 5,500 or 6,000, your sample size will be much smaller. Let's say 200, 300, 100 students that you will be interviewing, that you will be surveying, that you will be observing. Margin of error is a percentage that tells you how much you can expect your survey results to reflect the views of the overall population. This is essentially telling you how accurate do you think your survey or your data will be in representing your overall population. How accurate is the 200 participants in represent? How accurate is their answers in representing the 5,000 or so students in the UC Senior High School department? And lastly, sampling confidence level. This is a percentage that reveals how confident you can be that the population would select an answer within a certain range. So this is a sort of assumption. Usually you can base it on your review of related literature or RRL. So for example, okay, I am confident that I'm 95% confident that my participants will mostly choose A, followed by B, followed by D. That is your sampling confidence level. Moving on now to the last part, we have non-probability sampling. Here, there is no way of estimating the probability that each element will be included in the sample. In short, there is a possibility that all members of the population are given equal chance to become part of the research. So here, you have a bit more control over how you will determine your participants or determine the people that will be involved in your research. So we have three examples here. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is simply some of the common ones. First is purpose sampling. You choose your respondents based on the purpose or objective of your research. So again, let's say you now here you will look at the people in your study who can specifically help you answer your research questions. For example, let's say your topic again is the environment. You will only then survey people who have extensive knowledge on the environment. So this narrows down your respondents considerably. You're no longer randomizing who you are observing or who you are surveying. You will only let's gather data from respondents who are knowledgeable or very familiar with environmental concepts, environmental practices, and environmental issues. That is an example of purpose sampling. Convenience sampling, on the other hand, is a process where respondents are chosen based on what's convenient for the researchers. So in this case, this is whatever makes it easy for the researchers. Okay, all of you or most of you are senior high students. In grade 12, let's say ICT animation, so you will probably choose to survey or gather data from people who are also from ICT animation. If you are from STEM, if you are from ABM, if you are from GAS, if you are from HUMS, you might prefer to start with your own strands first because that is what is convenient, that is what is familiar to you. Or you may limit yourself to only interviewing or gathering data from people who are within the senior high school of UC because again, that is one of the easiest ways that you can gather data because it is accessible. You are familiar with the layout of UC, you are a student of UC, you have access to the facilities, so it is much easier for you to go around the school, for example, or and gather data, or you can it's much easier for you to pass around a online survey or online form among your peers and then have them distribute it to other students or other sections. Lastly is quota sampling. Respondents are chosen based on a quota, whether or not you conduct a probability or non-probability sampling. So this is more of if you have a set criteria. I want to interview 5 people from each department, from each strand. So whether or not I use probability or non-probability sampling does not matter as long as I can meet that quota. Okay, 5 from HUMS, 5 from ICT Animation, 5 from ICT CCS, 5 from HE, 5 from STEM, 5 from GAS, 5 from um, uh, let's say the college even, and so on, or 5 from the college department, 5 from junior high school. So it doesn't matter as long as you meet your criteria, you meet your quota. You will use either random sampling methods, or you will use purpose sampling as long as you can meet the quota that you have set for your research. So that is the 3 non-probability sampling. um, I hope that you have learned something today. So again, these are tools that are used for quantitative research. Again, the process here is that you will pick first what type of um, method that you will use. Will you do observation, or will you do experiments, or will you do a combination of both? And then how will you sample? Do you plan to do non-probability sampling? You will randomize, you will focus more on the objective of your research, or will you make use of randomization? You will just choose random clusters so that you can have a bit more of a realistic data. So that will be up to you and your group mates. Okay, so thank you very much for watching and have a good day.